Hi guys, glory to Jesus Christ and welcome back to my channel. You're getting the glasses again. I'm sorry, it's 2 in the morning on Valentine's Day and I am up recording a video about my time in a cult. Good times. So if you see any sartorial changes in the middle of the video, it's because I got upset and decided to record this over multiple days because, as I'm sure you can imagine, this is not going to be a happy fun time video for me. Not so much because of my experience in the cult when I was literally in the cult, but the difficult part was kind of what happened afterwards and all of the fallout and just emotional and spiritual tailspin that I was in for a decade afterwards. So let's get right into it. Disclaimer time. I am not a psychologist. I am not a cult expert. I'm not claiming to be. I'm just telling you what I went through. In the hopes that maybe it'll have some kind of a pinpoint of useful information for somebody else. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. Fingers crossed, because this isn't going to be a fun one for yours truly. Second, hand in hand with that, I recognize and acknowledge that there are people who get involved in cults all over the world who wind up getting murdered, who wind up losing all of their money, they wind up getting held against their will in some compound somewhere, and there's all kinds of other nastiness that happens, and YouTube doesn't like certain words, so we're going to refrain from that, but bad things happen in cults. My experience was not that severe at all, and I'm not trying to make it seem more dramatic than it really was. The reason that I am doing this video is, first off, because I was asked to, because there's people who have approached me and they said they were curious about it, and more importantly is I want to convey how this experience, as horrific as it was, ultimately was spiritually profitable, because I really believe, you guys, that if we approach things with the right mindset, we can get a spiritual benefit out of literally any experience, regardless of how traumatic it is. And that is how we turn a loss into a win. That is one way that we take the kingdom of heaven by force, is refusing to just feel like a victim and feel depressed and dejected and despondent and isolated and all of those things that the devil loves and the Lord hates. So, finally, one more thing. When we talk about cults, we have to talk a little bit about my background, what made me vulnerable to being sucked into a cult. I don't want you to interpret this in any way as a criticism of my parents or of any of the other churches that I went to pre-cult, any of their pastors, any of the lay leadership, nothing like that. It's not a criticism of anybody as a person, but there are certain facts about things that I did not know, that I wish I had known, that I wish I had been taught. The issue is, though, sure, I could sit here and get bitter and go, well, why didn't my parents equip me better? But I don't blame them at all, because you can't teach what you aren't taught. They didn't know, and their parents didn't know, and their parents didn't know. So it's this propagation of lack of facts that really is at fault here. It's absolutely not my parents. My parents are amazing people, and no criticism of them is intended in this video. So if you're ready, I am not ready, but we're going to get right into this. Chapter 1, background. So the first thing that you need to know is I was an only child of devoutly Protestant, but mainstream Protestant parents. By mainstream Protestant, I'm talking about, your average denominations, your Presbyterians, your Evangelical Lutherans, your Methodists, etc. So they were not fundamentalists. However, they were and still are extremely devout. And so, the church, such as it was always an important part of growing up. We would go to church every Sunday and sometimes in the middle of the week as well, if there was something going on. Also, one little extra flavor to this is the fact that even before I heard about this cult and got invited to go to, worship services with them, my family had had a cult experience before. Unfortunately, I have a family member who was murdered by a cult. And I was too young to really understand what that meant at the time. I was like 7 or 8 when it happened. But certainly we were on like red alert for weirdness kind of thing, which is one of the reasons why it's kind of remarkable that this whole thing happened. We're going to talk more about that in a bit. So the primary thing that made me vulnerable to getting snookered into a cult was theological ignorance. I was 16 years old, and I was basically out in the world with more independence than I'd ever had, and I was completely sent out without any kind of theological armor at all. Here's the shockingly short list of what I, world's biggest quotes, knew theologically going into this. This is horrific. I knew that God created everything that exists. I knew that Jesus Christ is God, and that through his crucifixion and resurrection, that people who believe in the gospel receive salvation. I knew that the good go to heaven and the bad go to hell. If you'd asked me what that meant, though, I wouldn't really have been able to tell you. You know, what's good, what's bad, what is heaven, what is hell. I couldn't have been able to elaborate on that at all. I understood that the Bible was an incredibly important book, and I believed at the time, because it's what I'd been told, that it was really the only Christian book that was beyond reproach. So basically, the Bible was up here, and everything else was kind of optional. Everything else was open to interpretation. And somehow, God would just tell you in your quote-unquote heart of hearts, I'm going to be doing a lot of air quotes this video, can you tell? That God would tell you in your heart of hearts if it was right or not, which is, of course, ridiculous, and that's a lie. But I didn't know that. Nobody in my circle knew that. Nobody understood how dangerous that is. I was completely blindsided when I thought this cult had the truth, and it turns out that they had precisely the opposite. They had not the truth. But of course, remember, all demonic lies are wrapped around a kernel of truth. So it's not like everything they believed was wrong, but it was just a lot of what they believed was very, very wrong. Here's the list of what I did not know. This is even more horrifying. I had never even heard the phrases holy tradition or apostolic succession. I'd never even heard them. Not only did I not know what they meant, never heard them. Sacraments. I couldn't have told you what a sacrament was. Again, I'd heard the word. I knew that Holy Communion was a sacrament. I knew baptism was a sacrament. And I think I knew marriage was a sacrament too. But, what is a sacrament? I don't know. I probably would have told you, it's a church ceremony thing. Because that's all I knew. 10 years of going to church at least once a week. 10 years of Sunday school. And I did not know that. Because I was never taught that. And if that doesn't make you want to vomit, it should. Another thing, never discussed. Why do Catholics and Orthodox and Protestants have different numbers of books in their Bibles? Why is it that Martin Luther took books out of the Bible? What's the history with that? Didn't know it. Never, ever, ever discussed even a little bit. Furthermore, I knew there were different English recensions of the Bible. King James, NRSV, etc. Why that was, though, I had no idea. And I certainly had no idea that if you were to line up, let's say, 10 different English Bibles, and you were to look at, critical passages, that they would say very different things in places. I could have only told you, King James is the Shakespeare-sounding one. That was about the extent of my biblical literacy at that point. And I had read the Bible literally cover to cover, the Protestant Bible, cover to cover. But I had no idea. I knew nothing at all. And of course, like most people, when they know nothing at all, I didn't know that I knew nothing at all. You don't know what you don't know. And so I was ripe for the cultish picking. Now, one more factor in this whole destabilization matrix was the fact that my mother, a couple months before this happened, had gotten into an absolutely horrendous car crash. She almost died. She broke half the bones in her body. She was in a nursing home for months. She had to learn how to walk again. She had to learn how to use her hands again. And she was a church organist, so imagine that. That was pretty crazy. It's a crazy time. I'm living at home out in the boonies with my father. Very stressful time. I was trying to keep myself together. I was trying to keep my dad together. It was really hard. So one day I got invited to church by a cultist, but I didn't know she was a cultist. Nobody knew. She was a family friend. She was a coworker of my mother's. My mother was in the room when she invited me to church, and my mother was like, sure, why not? If you want to go check it out, check it out. Because at the time, I was not attending any church. I had recently left the church. Long story having to do with taking voice lessons from the organist. It didn't work out, so I just wound up taking a step back. But again, as a mainline Protestant, I didn't understand that the church is the literal, body of Christ, and that you need to be going to church, and that worship is a corporate thing. I didn't know that because I wasn't taught it. Are you getting the theme here? So I didn't think it was an urgent thing of, oh my gosh, I need a parish. But that made me very susceptible to this casual invitation to come to church. So that is the backdrop of my descent into madness. So, the logistics of this cult. They didn't even have their own building. They rented space, funny enough, in a Jewish temple. Makes sense in a way because, the Jewish holy day is Saturday, so on Sunday mornings they didn't need their building. And so this cult would meet in their fellowship hall gym thingamajigger. And immediately there were a lot of things that attracted me to this organization. You're going to notice not once during this video, God willing, will I call them a church. First off, the room was packed. Every single service, the room was packed. Hundreds of people. And everybody there was full of energy. They were there because they wanted to be there. It wasn't just a matter of rolling out of bed on Sunday morning and, I have to go to church because it's what you do on Sundays. No. These were people who were very excited about their faith and they really believed it. They were very genuine. It was to the point where people would bring notebooks to church and they would be taking notes, during the sermons and stuff, which I thought was wonderful because even at a young, super young age, I understood that we were dealing with matters of salvation and that either you were going to completely just disregard it and not even bother getting out of bed on Sunday morning, or that you should make it the most important part of your life. So I vibed with that a lot. And they had people of all different ages. And so I was kind of taken under the wing of 4 or 5 of these younger women. They were college age, maybe between 20 and 25-ish. And so within the first 3 weeks of me starting to go to this church, not only was I going to their Sunday morning services, but they had a Wednesday night worship / Bible study thingamajigger. And then we would do Bible study outside of church in a small group environment once or twice a week. We would meet up at the mall food court or McDonald's and have a Bible study. And in the beginning, it was great. I loved it because, to their credit, these people really did love God very deeply. They were very sincere. This was not the kind of cult where you got people pulling the strings who are, have real evil motives. That's not the kind of cult this was. This was a cult where people really were genuine, but they were just so unbelievably misguided and they had no idea. Okay? Important to note that. They were good people, but they believed in ridiculous, stupid things. So within the first month, red flags all over the place that yours truly just didn't see at all. So for starters, my father, being very, conscientious about cults, said, "What is their creed? Sit here on the sofa next to me and tell me what this church believes." And I couldn't really do it. I tried, but I couldn't really make a lot of sense because they didn't really say what they believed other than the Bible. We believe in the Bible. Okay. So I told my father that, and I know that concerned him, but I would imagine when you have a 16-year-old child, that eventually the training wheels have to come off and that you have to give them some independence and they have to make mistakes and they have to kind of explore different parts of life on their own. And if they fall down and it's a huge mistake, you can help them pick themselves up and dust themselves off. But that you can't fight all your kids' battles for you. And so I imagine that my dad was kind of struggling with that, and he felt like if he tried to discourage me too much, that it might actually make me want it more. I kind of think that's what his strategy was. The next red flag was almost immediately, they wanted my parents to come to church too. And it wasn't, they should come to church, we'd love to meet them. It was, well, if they're not worshiping with us, they might not be saved. And as a 16-year-old girl who knew nothing about anything, that was scary to me. Of course, I wouldn't want that fate for anybody, let alone my parents. So, I tried to get my parents to come to church. My mother was doing the substitute organist thing at various churches around town, so my dad came to church. I think he only came once. I don't remember having a really in-depth discussion with him about it. And one of two things happened. It was either that on the surface, the crazy wasn't immediately visible, or that he was doing that training wheels thing. And I have a feeling it was a mixture of the two. As I became more and more involved, I had less and less and less freedom. Intellectual freedom, spiritual freedom. And that's how cults work, by the way, is it's a gradual but fairly rapid kind of stripping away of your individuality. And in my case, it wasn't about, what you could eat or what you could wear or anything like that, but it was about things like asking questions was a big problem. And particularly, you could ask a question, but you better accept the answer. You better not say, well, wait a minute, now what about this? And Lord help you if you disagreed. If you disagree, you're going to hell. And they began to pick up on the fact that I am not the kind of person to just lay down and accept something as true. And so they took away my privilege of taking my own notes during Bible study. So I had to bring my notebook, but I wasn't allowed to write in it. Whoever it was running the Bible study had to write my notes for me. Red flag. I don't know why I didn't run. When it really got to that level where it was like, if you think outside the box, you're going to hell. Fairly soon after that happened was the day that I finally broke. I realized that what they were doing was trying to just tighten that leash until, I had no blood flow to my brain. And I'm going to steer clear in this video of the issue that kind of finally made me make that decision, because I'm not up for it right now, to be perfectly honest with you. And it doesn't matter what the issue was. Okay, I'm not trying to be secretive for the sake of being mysterious on YouTube. It's just I don't want to deal with it, frankly. But there was a Bible study where I was being taught a load. And when I tried to explain to them why I believed that they were wrong, it was a big problem, kind of big fight, right? Not a physical fight, but I was very upset. And we went right from that Bible study into their Sunday morning church service. And I don't even remember anything about it, except, how funny is this? I remember the dress I was wearing. Isn't that weird? It's weird, the things you remember from a traumatic experience. All I could hear in my ears was like the blood rushing, because I was coming to this horrible realization that I thought I had found the truth. I thought I had found a spiritual home, and when in fact I had found not the truth. And so about halfway through the church service, I snapped. And I grabbed my purse and I literally ran. So I got in the car and I drove home, and I was screaming at God. I was ugly crying. I probably looked like I was having a seizure. I probably shouldn't have been driving. But I knew I had to get away from those people. I needed to get off of that property. I needed to go to my house. And thankfully, they did not know where my house was. So I went home. Both my parents were home, and they were taking a nap in bed. And I blew in their bedroom without even knocking. Thank goodness they actually literally were just taking a nap. And I was a mess. Screaming, crying. It's a cult. It's a cult. It's a cult. And they did their best to comfort me, but it didn't really help because, of course, they did not have any concrete information, any facts that they could use to reassure me that, yes, I was correct and that what I was being taught was not the truth. They couldn't do that because they didn't have it, because they'd never been taught it themselves. Thus began this horrific 10 years plus emotional, psychological, and spiritual tailspin. And it revolved around 3 issues. 1, most immediately, I thought I had the truth, and then I realized I did not. So extreme destabilization that gave me a lot of questions. Then there was issue 2, which was the horrible acknowledgement that what if they were right and I was wrong? And what if the truth was what they were saying, which I hated what they were saying? What if I was the one who was wrong? And what if, in order to receive salvation, I had to go along with what I hated? There was that part of my brain that was going, well, geez, you have to acknowledge the fact that just because you feel this way, you could be wrong. So that's further destabilizing, and I had no idea who to trust. I had no idea where spiritual authority was. Because in Protestant churches, there's a limit to that. And beyond that, there's just nothing. You're stepping out over a cliff. And the third issue, and this is the real root of this avalanche tailspin, was this terrifying question. What if neither I nor they are correct, and there is no objective truth at all? That's a scary thought. And so for 10 years, I didn't know which end was up. I was angry that God put me through this experience. I was angry at my parents for not teaching me what I should have known, because I didn't understand, as I do now, that the reason they didn't do that was because they didn't have that information themselves. So I was not right to be angry, but I was. And I had no idea who was right and who was wrong. And of course, going to college doesn't help that, because in college is when you're supposed to question everything. So, I really didn't know what was what. But because God is unbelievably gracious and merciful, in his own time, he allowed me to fall up the stairs into the Orthodox faith. And now that I understand where the spiritual authority is, and I understand not only what I believe, but why I believe it, and what the foundation for those beliefs is, now I can see that this experience that I had, where it felt like the floor got yanked out from underneath my feet, was profitable. And so I want to explain to you why I feel that way. What did it show me was important? Well, the first thing that it showed me, and this is part of the impetus for this whole YouTube channel, is the importance of seeking the truth and of knowing what you believe and why you believe it and how you came to believe it. And knowing what the other positions on issues are and why you don't believe them. You have to have these facts. Emotional comfort is not a barometer of spiritual truth. And so we have to get away from that idea. It is not sufficient. What we need are facts. Spiritual facts. And if I'd had spiritual facts, I, of course, would not have been vulnerable to this. But at that point, I wasn't even aware that spiritual facts really existed. And so this was kind of my wake-up call to the search for those. And I'm grateful for that. And hand in hand with that, I learned that when people say, oh, well, I'm not going to discuss my beliefs with anybody. My beliefs are between me and God because, I'm a good Christian and I don't want to offend people. No, that dog don't hunt. What that perspective is truly rooted in, subconsciously, is fear and spiritual cowardice. It's being afraid to answer questions honestly and give people information that maybe they don't want. And let me be clear, I'm not talking about handing out tracts in the Home Depot parking lot. I'm talking about how when somebody comes and says, hey, I have a question, what do you believe about this issue? What does your church believe? Or what does your church teach about this issue? You might know, okay, well, I know the answer to that, but, they might not like it, but they asked me. So I'm going to respect them enough to tell them the truth. I learned how critical that is because we are enjoined in Scripture to be ready in season and out of season whenever we have the opportunity, whenever that comes knocking, to maybe give somebody a pinpoint of light when they ask us for it, even if it's uncomfortable. And I've really had to learn that. And I've had to learn, and I'm still learning, not to go too far with it and try to phrase things in a way that they are most likely to receive profitably. But ultimately, not to be a coward and to remember that the praise of God is more important than the praise of humankind. So 3 takeaways from this that hopefully at least one person out there will find useful. Number 1. Emotions are not a barometer of truth. Emotional catharsis, it certainly has its place in life, but it is not the barometer of truth because different people respond emotionally to different things, and God and His truth are above those human passionate emotions. Number 2, asking questions is never bad. It is never bad to humble yourself and say, hey, I'm ignorant on this. Can you explain this to me? Let me go look up what the Holy Father say about this. What does Saint so-and-so say about this? What does the Scripture say about this? What does my priest say about this? Ask questions. If there's things you don't understand, ask questions. And if you are ever in a situation where you are chastised for asking questions, or you're told that the very fact that you're asking questions means you're a bad person or a bad Christian, you gotta run. Don't walk. You gotta run. Questions and curiosity about salvation are good. As long as you're asking them in good faith, not to be sarcastic, but as long as you are asking a genuine question. And you also have to understand if somebody tries to kind of call you on the carpet for that and they get mad at you or defensive, try not to take it personally. Don't judge them for it. Because again, the root of that response is fear because they don't know either. They can't explain it, and so that's why they're getting angry and defensive. So don't hate them for that. Don't judge them for that. Pray for them for that. And also pray for yourself for the answer. And lastly, if you are maybe thinking you're in a cult or you're kind of heading down that road, get out. Don't walk. Run. It doesn't matter if the organization fits some dictionary definition of what a cult is. If you feel that you are being manipulated and controlled emotionally, psychologically, spiritually, if your freedoms are being restricted, if you are not allowed to ask questions, if you are not allowed to respectfully disagree, if you are not allowed to do, independent research, that's huge, huge, huge red flags. Run. And when you do, don't try to do it politely, in the sense of don't try to sit down with these cult members and explain yourself and try to get them to be okay with it, because you are not going to do that. God willing, maybe at a later time, some of them will also leave, and then you can have coffee and talk about it. But while they are still in the cult mindset, you are not going to have success trying to explain to them, trying to get their blessing to leave. So don't even try. Just make a clean break, change your number if you have to. Just get out. And you are probably going to feel a little bit stupid because you're not going to be able to explain, even to yourself necessarily, 100% rationally and in an orderly fashion with all the facts, why you believe that they are wrong and why you left. You're not going to know that up here immediately. That's going to take time because you're going to have to heal. You're going to have to learn gradually. That is okay. You do not have to wait until you are at that point to get out. Get out now and seek God for the rest. And in his own time, which is usually not the timeline we would prefer, because we love to rush around, he will give you the information that you need. And you're going to feel dumb. That's okay. I've learned to appreciate feeling dumb. Because if you feel kind of stupid, you feel kind of dumb, okay, well, thank you, Lord, for trying to help me be humble. Go with it. Just remember, God and his truth are above all of those feelings. And that you don't have to have all the answers to know where the truth is not. If you're in a situation like that, run. All right, well, I think that's just about enough talking about this business for now. I already have a bunch of other videos in the pipeline that are going to be happier and more enjoyable to make. So if you made it to the end of this one, thank you very much. You remain in my constant prayers. Sincerely, you do. And I need to be in yours too, please. Please hit the like button. It helps with the YouTube search rankings. And if you are not already subscribed, I would love it if you would. Again, helps with the rankings. And if you want to know when the videos are being dropped, hit the bell icon. I'm shooting for about once a week. Hopefully more eventually, but I don't want to promise more than that. So I love you all. I hope you're having a good day, night, afternoon, what have you. And I will see you guys real soon in the next one. Bye.